A poor student falls in love with a poor homeless man unaware he's a rich billionaire. And what she did when he revealed his identity will shock everyone. Laya Dawson counted pennies for ramen while falling for a beggar in a broken wheelchair at her morning bus stop. But the homeless man she fed soup and shared her dreams with vanished without warning, leaving her heart shattered and searching. When a black car pulled up weeks later and that same man stepped out in a tailored suit, introducing himself as Elias Ward, Billionaire heir to Ward Industries. Laya's world collapsed because the poor homeless man she loved wasn't poor at all, and the rich billionaire standing before her wore guilt like a second skin. She thought she knew poverty, survival, and loneliness, but he knew secrets darker than anything she could imagine. So when he revealed his identity in front of his venomous sister and the glittering elite who never saw her as anything but an intruder, what did this poor student do? Did she walk away from the rich billionaire who lied? Did she forgive the homeless man who disappeared? Or did her reaction expose a truth so raw it would shatter every assumption about love, class, and redemption? Laya Dawson's mornings began in darkness, not the romantic kind poets wrote about, but the suffocating kind that came from unpaid electric bills and empty refrigerators. She woke at 5 every day in her cramped studio apartment, where the heating never worked and the walls were thin enough to hear her neighbors' arguments word for word. Her routine was mechanical: instant coffee, yesterday's bread, 40 minutes on 2 buses to reach Hillcrest University, where she studied economics on a scholarship that barely covered tuition. She worked nights at a campus cafeteria, scraping plates and dodging the pitying looks of students who didn't have to choose between textbooks and groceries. The bus stop on Mercer Street became her unintentional refuge. She arrived there every morning at 6:15, standing under the flickering streetlight while the city slowly blinked awake. That's where she first saw him, a man in a broken wheelchair parked at the corner with a cardboard sign that read, "Hungry, anything helps." His clothes were layered and filthy, his beard overgrown, his hands wrapped in fingerless gloves that had seen better decades. Most people walked past him like he was invisible, their eyes sliding over his existence as if poverty were contagious. Laya saw him because she recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same hollow exhaustion she saw in her own mirror every morning. The same quiet resignation that came from being unseen. One morning in late September, she stopped. She had exactly $3 in her pocket, enough for coffee at school, but something about the way he sat there, shoulders hunched, head down, as if he'd stopped expecting anything from anyone, made her reach into her bag. She pulled out the granola bar she'd saved for lunch and held it out. He looked up slowly, and she saw his eyes for the first time. They were gray, storm cloud gray, and startlingly clear beneath the grime. There was intelligence there, sadness, and something else she couldn't name. "Here," she said softly. His fingers trembled as he took it. "Thank you." His voice was rough, unused, but the words carried weight. She nodded and turned away before he could say anything else, before the emotion building in her chest could spill over. But the next morning she brought him a banana. The morning after that, an apple. By October, she was stopping every day, sometimes with food, sometimes just with a few minutes of conversation that felt more honest than anything she experienced in her classes or at work. She learned he didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were careful, chosen with the precision of someone who'd once been educated. She told him about her studies, about the impossibility of staying afloat in a city that devoured people like her. He listened like her words mattered, like she mattered, and that attention became addictive. One particularly cold morning in November, she brought him soup from the cafeteria in a styrofoam container she'd smuggled out. She sat on the curb beside his wheelchair, and they ate in comfortable silence while dawn broke pink and gold over the buildings. She didn't know his name. He'd never offered it, and she'd never asked, as if naming him would make the situation too real, too complicated. "Why do you keep coming back?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. Laya looked at him, really looked at him, and saw past the layers of dirt and desperation. Because nobody else does. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in whatever wall he'd built around himself. "You shouldn't waste your kindness on me." "It's not a waste." She stood brushing off her jeans. Kindness is never a waste. He watched her walk away, and she felt the weight of his gaze long after she boarded her bus. The routine continued through November and into December. She brought him scarves when the temperature dropped, extra gloves, hand warmers from the dollar store. He never asked for anything, but he accepted what she gave with a gratitude that felt almost painful. They talked about everything and nothing. Books they'd read, dreams they'd abandoned, the peculiar cruelty of winter in the city. She learned he'd once had a different life, though he never specified what kind. There were hints in the way he spoke, references to places and things that suggested the education, privilege, a past that didn't match his present. Laya found herself thinking about him between classes, during shifts at the cafeteria, in the quiet moments before sleep. It wasn't pity anymore. It was something deeper, more dangerous. She recognized the feeling with equal parts terror and inevitability. She was falling for him, for a homeless man in a broken wheelchair whose real name she didn't even know. She told herself it was ridiculous. She barely survived on her own. She couldn't save someone else. But the heart didn't operate on logic, and every morning she looked forward to those few minutes at the bus stop more than anything else in her day. Then one morning in mid-December, he was gone. The corner where he always sat was empty, except for a few scattered cigarette butts and a dark stain on the concrete. Laya stood there for 10 minutes thinking maybe he was just late, but deep down she knew. He was gone, and he wasn't coming back. She searched for him. Every morning she walked different streets, checked other corners, asked other homeless people if they'd seen a man in a wheelchair. Nobody knew anything, or if they did, they weren't telling. Days turned into a week, then two. Christmas came and went in a blur of loneliness and unanswered questions. She kept bringing food to the bus stop just in case, but the corner remained empty, a wound in her routine that wouldn't heal. By January, Laya had almost convinced herself she'd imagined the whole thing, that her loneliness had conjured a connection that never truly existed. She threw herself into her studies, picked up extra shifts, and tried to forget the storm-gray eyes that had seen her when everyone else looked away. Then on a bitter morning in late January, as she walked across campus toward her economics lecture, a black car pulled up beside her. Not just any car, a Mercedes so sleek and expensive, it looked out of place among the student parking lots and rust bucket sedans. The back door opened and a man stepped out. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than her entire year's tuition, his hair cut perfectly, his face clean-shaven. But it was his eyes that stopped her heart. Storm cloud gray, looking at her with the same intensity she remembered from the bus stop. "Laya," he said, and his voice was the same rough, gentle tone that had shared soup with her on cold mornings. Her backpack slipped from her shoulder and hit the pavement. "What? Who?" "My name is Elias Ward." He took a step toward her, and she saw now what the dirt and distance had hidden before, the sharp angles of wealth, the confidence of someone born into power, the controlled elegance that came from a lifetime of privilege. "I need to explain everything." The drive to the Ward estate passed in stunned silence. Laya sat in the back of the Mercedes, separated from Elias by leather seats and years of lies, watching the city transform from concrete sprawl to manicured suburbs to an exclusive gated community where the houses weren't houses at all, but architectural statements of obscene wealth. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, to throw open the door and run, but her body felt disconnected from her brain, operating on autopilot, while her mind spun in endless loops of confusion and betrayal. Elias sat across from her, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. The man she'd known, the one who'd sat in a broken wheelchair and accepted her granola bars with trembling hands, felt like a ghost now. This version was too polished, too composed, too much like the people who'd ignored her existence her entire life. The car stopped in front of gates that looked like they belonged to a museum. They swept open automatically, revealing a driveway that curved through grounds so perfectly landscaped they looked artificial. The mansion at the end was all glass and white stone, modern and cold, the kind of place featured in architecture magazines Laya would never be able to afford. "Welcome to my family's home," Elias said quietly as the driver opened her door. Laya stepped out onto cobblestones that probably cost more per square foot than her monthly rent. I don't understand any of this. I know. Come inside, please. She followed him because she needed answers more than she needed pride. The interior was exactly what she expected. Soaring ceilings, abstract art, furniture that looked sculptural rather than comfortable. A woman descended the curved staircase as they entered, and Laya knew immediately this was family. She had Elias's sharp features but none of his warmth, her eyes calculating and cold as they swept over Laya's thrift store coat and scuffed boots. So this is her, the woman said, her voice dripping with something between amusement and contempt. The little charity project who thinks she's special. Ava, Elias's voice carried a warning. Not now. When then, dear brother? Ava descended the last few steps, circling Laya like a predator assessing prey. When were you planning to tell your pet that you're not actually the tragic homeless man she imagined? That you're heir to a $5 billion company? That you've been playing dress up in the streets like it's some kind of spiritual journey? Each word landed like a slap. Laya looked at Elias, saw the truth written across his face, and felt something inside her crack. $5 billion? Laya, $5 billion. She laughed and it came out hollow. I brought you soup, dollar store soup. I gave you my lunch money. I worried about you freezing to death while you… What? Slummed it to find yourself? It wasn't like that. Elias moved toward her, but she stepped back, and he stopped. I left because I had to, because I was drowning in this… He gestured around the opulent room, and I needed to remember what it meant to be human. So you used me. The words came out flat, emotionless, because if she let the emotion in, she would shatter right there on the marble floor. You used my kindness, my poverty, as some kind of spiritual experiment. I didn't use you. You saved me. Oh, how moving, Ava interjected, examining her nails with theatrical disinterest. The poor little rich boy saved by the poor little poor girl. It's like a fairy tale, except you forgot the part where she's completely out of her depth and doesn't belong here. Laya turned to Ava, and for the first time since entering this nightmare, she felt something other than shock. She felt anger, bright and clarifying. You're right, I don't belong here. I belong in the real world where people struggle and survive and don't play pretend with other people's lives. She looked back at Elias. Why am I here? Why did you bring me to this place? Because I owe you the truth. His voice was steady, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. I owe you everything, actually, and I needed you to see who I really am, what I walked away from, so you could understand. Understand what? Why I'm standing here instead of back at that bus stop. Why I can't go back to the company, the board meetings, the life everyone expects me to live. He took a breath. 3 years ago, Ward Industries was developing a residential complex on the east side. I was overseeing the project, cutting corners to meet deadlines and impress my father. There was an accident, a structural collapse. 2 workers died. The room went silent. Even Ava stopped her performance, watching her brother with something that might have been surprise. It was ruled an accident, Elias continued, his voice rough with barely controlled emotion. No charges filed, no personal liability. The company paid settlements, made the family sign NDAs, and everyone moved on. Everyone except me. I looked at those men's faces, at their families, and I couldn't. His voice broke. I couldn't live with who I'd become, so I left. I took a wheelchair from a hospital donation bin, old clothes from a shelter, and I went to the street closest to where those men died. I sat there every day for 2 years, punishing myself, becoming invisible the way I'd made them invisible when I chose profit over safety. Laya felt dizzy. This wasn't the explanation she'd expected, and she didn't know what to do with it. And then you stopped. He looked at her with such raw vulnerability that she had to look away. The first person in 2 years who saw me as human instead of scenery, who gave without expecting anything back, who sat with me and talked like I mattered. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. The possibility of redemption, of being more than my worst mistake. So I was absolution, Laya said quietly. A way to feel better about yourself. No, you were hope. The gala happened 3 weeks later, and Laya still didn't fully understand why she'd agreed to attend. Maybe it was morbid curiosity. Maybe it was the small part of her that wanted to see Elias's world from the inside, to understand the life he'd abandoned. Or maybe it was because despite everything, the lies, the betrayal, the impossible gulf between their realities, she couldn't stop thinking about those mornings at the bus stop, the connection that had felt more real than anything in her carefully controlled survival. The dress Elias sent was beautiful, probably worth more than her car, if she'd owned a car. Deep blue silk that moved like water, elegant without being ostentatious. She felt like an imposter wearing it, like a child playing dress-up in adult clothes. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw someone else staring back. Someone who looked like she belonged in Elias's world, even though she knew the truth beneath the silk. The car picked her up at 7, the same driver, the same Mercedes, but this time she wasn't in shock. She was terrifyingly clear-headed, aware of every detail as they drove through the city toward the Ward family's downtown hotel, where the gala was being held. The Winter Charity Ball, Elias had explained, an annual event where the city's wealthy gathered to congratulate themselves on their philanthropy while spending millions on a single evening. The ballroom was a cathedral of wealth, crystal chandeliers, champagne fountains, women in gowns that cost more than Laya's annual income, men in tuxedos discussing stock portfolios and vacation homes like everyone had 5 properties scattered across continents. Laya felt every eye on her as she entered on Elias's arm, felt the whispers that followed them like a wake. Who is she? Where did he find her? Not one of us. Elias's hand tightened on her arm. Ignore them. Hard to ignore 100 people deciding you're not good enough. But she kept her head high, channeling every ounce of dignity she'd learned from surviving on nothing. From facing down landlords and loan officers and professors who assumed poverty meant stupidity. Ava appeared like a specter, resplendent in white, her smile sharp as broken glass. Brother, and his little project. How brave of you both to make an appearance. Ava, don't start, Elias warned. Start what? I'm being welcoming. She turned to Laya with false sweetness. Tell me, dear, how does it feel to be a living charity case? To know that everyone here is wondering whether you're sleeping with him for money or just for the experience of being someone important for 5 minutes? Ava! Elias's voice cut across the space between them, hard and cold. But Laya stepped forward, closing the distance between herself and Ava until they were nearly nose to nose. It feels, she said clearly, loud enough for the nearby clusters of guests to hear, like I'm the only honest person in this room. I never pretended to be anything other than what I am. Can you say the same? Ava's composure cracked for just a second, a flash of something ugly beneath the polished surface. Then the moment passed and she was smiling again. How delightfully bold. I can see why my brother finds you amusing. The evening proceeded in a blur of awkward introductions and carefully polite conversations that couldn't quite hide the underlying judgment. Laya met Elias's father, a man who looked at her like she was a problem to be solved. She met board members, society matrons, politicians who kissed cheeks and sized up everyone like potential assets or liabilities. Through it all, Elias stayed close, his presence a shield against the worst of the scrutiny. Then came the speeches, the foundation director, the mayor, various donors congratulating themselves on their generosity. Finally, Elias took the stage, and the room quieted with interest. He was, after all, the prodigal son, the heir who'd walked away from everything and was rumored to be planning a return. 3 years ago, Elias began, his voice steady and clear through the microphone, I made a decision that cost 2 people their lives. I chose speed over safety, profit over people, and because of that choice, 2 workers, Marcus Rivera and James Chen, died in a structural collapse at one of our construction sites. The room went silent. This wasn't the speech anyone expected. Laya saw board members exchanging panicked looks, saw Ava's face go white, then red. I've spent the last 3 years trying to understand how I became someone who could make that choice, Elias continued. I left everything behind and lived on the streets near the site where those men died, hoping to punish myself into redemption. But punishment isn't redemption. Hiding isn't accountability. He paused and his eyes found Laya in the crowd. I met someone who taught me that. Someone who showed me that real humanity isn't about grand gestures or charitable donations. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, and treating them with the dignity they deserve regardless of their circumstances. He extended his hand toward her. Laya Dawson reminded me what it means to be human. She gave when she had nothing to give. She cared when caring was a luxury she couldn't afford. And when I revealed who I really was, she didn't forgive me easily or quietly. She demanded better from me. Laya felt tears burning behind her eyes but refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of these people. So tonight, Elias said, his voice growing stronger, I'm announcing that I'm returning to Ward Industries. Not to resume my old position, but to create a new division focused on worker safety, fair compensation, and accountability. Every project will be reviewed. Every past accident will be reinvestigated. The Rivera and Chen families will receive full financial support and public acknowledgement without NDAs. We will be better because we must be better. The applause started slowly, uncertain, then built to something that felt almost genuine. Laya saw Ava standing at the edge of the stage, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. Then Ava moved. She walked to the microphone as Elias stepped back, her smile brilliant and terrifying. How inspiring, she said, her voice sugary poison. My brother's confession, his redemption arc. But let's be honest about what really happened, shall we? Ava, don't, Elias warned, but she ignored him. Elias wasn't forced out of the company because of guilt. He was forced out because the board couldn't trust him anymore. Because after the accident, he became unstable, unpredictable. He had a breakdown, threw away his life, and now he's back with his little poor girlfriend, thinking that makes him some kind of hero. She turned to Laya, her eyes glittering with malice. You think you saved him? You were just a prop in his redemption fantasy. A convenient symbol of suffering he could rescue to make himself feel better. The words landed like physical blows. Laya felt the room's energy shift, felt the sympathy and curiosity curdle into something uglier. She looked at Elias and saw the truth of it. Not all of it, but enough. He had needed her to be broken so he could feel like a savior. He had needed her poverty to absolve his privilege. But she also saw something else. She saw the man who had sat with her on cold mornings and listened like her dreams mattered. The man who had accepted her kindness with trembling hands and genuine gratitude. The man who was trying, however imperfectly, to be better than his worst moment. Laya walked to the stage. Every step felt impossible, but she took them anyway. She took the microphone from Ava's hand and faced the room of wealthy strangers who had already decided she didn't belong. You're right, she said, her voice clear despite the fear coursing through her. I was poor. I am poor. I gave Elias food and kindness because that's what I could afford to give. And yes, maybe he needed that to feel less guilty about his mistakes. But you know what else is true? She looked at Ava, then at Elias, then back at the assembled guests. Redemption isn't found in hiding from your mistakes or in having people like you. She turned to Elias. It's found in facing what you did honestly and doing the work to make it right, even when it's hard and uncomfortable and no one applauds. She set down the microphone and walked off the stage. She didn't run, didn't hide. She walked with her head high through the silent ballroom toward the exit. Behind her, she heard movement, voices, the sound of Elias calling her name. But she kept walking because she'd said what needed to be said, and now she needed air, needed space, needed to think without the weight of all those eyes on her. She made it to the garden outside before he caught up to her. The night was cold, stars hidden behind city light pollution, but the garden was beautiful in an artificial way. Perfectly trimmed hedges, imported flowers, marble pathways that probably cost more to install than she'd earn in her lifetime. Laya, wait! Elias's voice was rough, desperate. Please. She turned to face him. I meant what I said in there. You need to do the work, real work. Not speeches or donations or bringing your poor girlfriend to galas to show everyone how evolved you are. I know. He ran a hand through his hair, destroying the perfect styling. I know I've handled this all wrong. I didn't bring you into my life to be a prop or a symbol. I brought you in because you're the first person in years who made me feel like I could be someone other than my worst mistake. But Ava was right about one thing. I did need you. I needed your strength, your clarity, your refusal to accept less than honesty. I'm not strong, Laya said quietly. I'm tired. I'm scared all the time. I work myself sick trying to stay afloat, and most days I'm not sure why I bother. You're the strongest person I've ever met. Elias stepped closer, and this time she didn't move away. You survive impossible circumstances with grace. You give when you have nothing to give. You see people, really see them, in a world designed to make us all invisible to each other. That's not weakness. That's extraordinary. I don't want to be your redemption, Laya said, and tears finally spilled over despite her best efforts. I don't want to be the poor girl who teaches the rich boy to be human again. I just wanted, her voice broke. I just wanted someone to see me, to care that I existed. I see you. Elias reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hands in his. I see you, Laya Dawson. Not as a symbol or a lesson, as you. Brilliant, stubborn, impossibly kind, even when the world gives you every reason not to be. I see you, and I'm asking, begging, for the chance to be someone worthy of being seen by you. They stood in the cold garden while the gala continued without them, while Ava's machinations and the board's concerns and society's judgment swirled somewhere behind those glass walls. Laya looked at their joined hands, at the contrast of his manicured nails and her broken cuticles, and saw not just the difference, but the connection. If we do this, she said finally, we do it honestly. No more secrets, no more games. You deal with your past properly. Talk to those families, make real changes, not just PR moves, and I'm not going to change who I am or pretend to fit into your world. I have my own life, my own struggles, my own dreams that have nothing to do with you or your money. I wouldn't want you any other way. His hands tightened on hers. I don't want to rescue you or save you. I just want to walk beside you, as equals, as partners, whatever that looks like. It looks messy, Laya warned. It looks like me working night shifts while you attend board meetings. It looks like your sister hating me and your father thinking I'm a gold digger. It looks like failing and fighting and figuring it out as we go. I can live with messy. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. I've lived in a broken wheelchair on the street for 2 years. I think I can handle complicated. Laya laughed despite everything, a real laugh that felt like releasing pressure that had built up for months. You're ridiculous. I'm honest. Finally. He paused. Will you come back to the bus stop with me tomorrow? The real place where we met? I want to start over. Do this right. No secrets, no pretending. Just us. She thought about everything that had happened, everything that could still go wrong, about Ava watching them from somewhere in that mansion with bitter eyes, about the gossip that would follow, the judgment, the impossible gap between their worlds. But she also thought about those mornings, about shared soup and quiet conversations, about the connection that had formed despite every reason it shouldn't have. Okay, she said finally, tomorrow morning, 6:15, and bring actual soup this time, the good kind. They stood in the garden as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, neither moving to go back inside. Above them, through the mansion's windows, they could see Ava standing silhouetted against the light, watching them with an expression that was no longer quite so hostile. Maybe it was respect, maybe just exhaustion, but for the first time her face held something other than contempt. The sun rose over the Ward estate, painting everything in shades of gold and pink that softened the hard edges of wealth and made the garden look almost real. Tomorrow they would go back to that bus stop, back to where it all began. They would sit on the curb and drink coffee and figure out how to build something honest from the ruins of lies and loneliness. For now, though, they stood together in the in-between space of ending and beginning, two people from impossible circumstances, choosing to believe that compassion, tested by truth and tempered by pain, could bridge any divide. The world would judge them. Ava would resist. The path forward would be hard, but they would walk it anyway. Together, honest, human, And that, Laya thought as Elias's hand found hers again in the dawnlight, was enough.